attention grabber, but does it matter? Pate is a criminal defense attorney. He joins me now. Good morning, Page.
Good morning, Carol.
Okay, so, you know, it was emotional just to see the symbols of this trial, the hoodie with the bullet hole through it, and this gun, this 9mm Glock. But in the end, will it matter?
The forensic evidence that we heard yesterday doesn't really prove the prosecution's case. It doesn't show when George Zimmerman shot Trayvon Martin. What it does do, though, is it helps the prosecution prove that some of the things that George Zimmerman is saying about that incident may not be true. So it goes to the credibility of George Zimmerman's statements that we heard earlier in the week. So I think it helps the prosecution in that regard.
And are you specifically talking about, they found no prints from Trayvon Martin on George Zimmerman's gun, and he said at least one time that Martin actually tried to grab his gun. I'm talking about Zimmerman, obviously, but there are no fingerprints on the gun.
Right. I think you would expect there to be some fingerprints or at least some DNA showing that Trayvon Martin had his hand on some part of the gun if what George Zimmerman is saying, or at least what he said back then, was true, and we can't show that at this point.
Okay, so testimony is set to resume tomorrow, and for the first time it probably will be very emotional because Trayvon Martin's mother will take the stand. And you got to believe that that 911 call will be played again in court, and Trayvon's mom will say from the stand, "That's my baby."
It's going to be very powerful, very emotional testimony, but my question is it enough? Will it be persuasive? You know, most jurors are going to expect the victim's mother to come in and say great things about her son and to certainly try to put a spin on the case as much as she can. Jurors will expect that. I wonder what jurors have already made up their mind. They've heard so much evidence, and almost every prosecution witness has at least been neutralized, if not completely turned into a defense lawyer, into a defense witness by these lawyers. If you're George Zimmerman, I think you're feeling pretty good right now.
All right, Paige, you're going to come back at the half hour, and we're going to have more discussion about Trayvon Martin's mother taking the stand. Thanks so much, Paige.
Sure.
We appreciate it. Jason Johnson is an HLN contributor and chief political correspondent for Politic 365 and a political science professor at Hiram College. And Tanya Miller is a former prosecutor. Good morning to all of you.
Good morning, Carol.
Okay, so we saw Trayvon Martin's mother, and certainly that's probably what she's going to be like on the stand tomorrow. How powerful will that be, Paige?
I think it's going to be very powerful. I think the jury expects to hear a lot of things about Trayvon Martin. I think the jury will then start to connect with Trayvon Martin. I really think, though, this type of a witness may have been better for the prosecution earlier in the case. Go ahead and get the jury thinking about who this person is, this life that we have lost. I think that would really have focused them in more on the prosecution's case. But regardless of when it happens, it's going to be powerful.
Yeah, Tanya, you would think they would have put Trayvon Martin's mom on the stand right after they played the 911 call at trial.
I would have put his mom on the stand first thing. I mean, you're lucky as a prosecutor when you have the ability to put the victim's mother or family member on the stand, because oftentimes they don't have any legally relevant testimony to give the jury. In this case, the mother does have legally relevant testimony. I would have started with the mom. Start strong always.
Jason, what do you think?
I completely agree, but I think what's also more telling is how does the defense react to having the mom? You can't really cross-examine a mother. She's going to say, I know what the sound of my child's voice is like. She's going to have to tell stories about, you know, I heard Trayvon screaming once when he skinned his knee helping his younger brother. I mean, those are the stories that you're going to hear, and I think the defense should just leave it alone, let it move on. There are 5 mothers on this jury. This is going to be huge.
So, Paige, if it's Don West, he's the defense attorney, he's not going to leave it alone. I can see him cross-examining Trayvon Martin's mom.
Somebody needs to chain him to the chair, because honestly, if the mother gets on the stand and testifies as we expect that she will, you don't cross-examine that witness. You're not going to make any points with that witness. Let the jury understand that you realize this is Mr. Martin's mother. You respect that. I'm not going to go up there and confront her. I can't gain any traction from that. No cross-examination is usually the best cross-examination.
So we were, before the show began, we were thinking about what was the biggest moment in these 8 days of trial, because the prosecution will probably rest tomorrow. So in your mind, Jason, what was the strongest, most compelling moment?
The most compelling moment, it actually brought me back to the opening statement. When John Guy said, you will hear in George Zimmerman's own words that he killed Trayvon Martin. And when they played the interview tape with Detective Serino, and Zimmerman said, He heard the 911 tape and he said, that doesn't sound like me screaming. And if you don't hear your own voice screaming and then the screaming stops when you shoot, it means you shot a guy who was calling for help. And I thought that was huge, probably the biggest thing in the prosecution's case so far.
Tanya?
I agree. I think that was huge, but I think the biggest moment for the state so far has been that forensic evidence, the DNA evidence that was not there. No Zimmerman blood on Trayvon Martin's sweatshirt. No Zimmerman blood under Trayvon Martin's nails. No forensic evidence connecting Trayvon Martin to that gun. So all of these things are discrediting what George Zimmerman has said about that fight, and that is very good for the prosecution.
Paige?
All that's important, but for the defense, let me tell you the critical thing when Serino said he believed George Zimmerman. Now, I know the judges said jury disregard that fact, but it has not left their minds. And when you have a law enforcement officer, someone you expect to be objective, someone jurors trust, say, I talked to him, I did my job, and I believe him. That's very powerful.
So many of the prosecution's witnesses kind of turned into defense witnesses. So you have to wonder, after the state rests this case tomorrow, who will the defense call?
Boy, that's a tough call. And you always wait to the very end of the state's case to make that decision. You have your client. George Zimmerman could testify. I don't think you put him on at this point. The jury's already heard his statements. You've got his story out there through these other prior interviews he's given. So I'm not sure. Maybe they have other people to talk about George Zimmerman, to talk about the facts. But if things are going the way they have been, I think as a defense lawyer, you simply rest.
Well, you could put members of George Zimmerman's family on the stand.
Sure you can.
So, and I think that actually would be helpful.
It's helpful if they can speak to what kind of person he is, but I don't know at this particular point if that's going to matter. I mean, I thought that the college professor yesterday was probably the nicest advocate for George Zimmerman's character that you can put out there. This guy was a good student, seemed like a regular guy. The best friend seemed to see he was a nice person. If you start bringing out Zimmerman's parents and his wife and everything else like that, everyone believes they're going to say nice things. That's not as moving.
Well, but still, it makes George Zimmerman perhaps more human because, I don't know, the jury really only knows him as the guy who shot Trayvon Martin and the guy who might have been a wannabe cop and overzealous. They don't really know him as a warm human being.
And he doesn't look very warm in the courtroom.
No.
I think his demeanor has not helped him in this process at all. And I disagree a little bit with Paige. I think they need to put George Zimmerman on the stand because the prosecution effectively, through the introduction of all of those statements that George Zimmerman has given in this case, they have shown that his version of events is contradictory, it's implausible, and it doesn't comport with the physical evidence.
I don't agree with that at all.
They've got
I think he's been pretty consistent, actually.
Oh, he has major inconsistencies.
But calling him as a witness, how's that going to change? Then you get to see the prosecution confront him with all these inconsistencies. He's squirming on the stand. How are you going to get around some of the things that he said that are clearly inconsistent? I don't think you put him through that. As a defense lawyer, you don't just have to think, well, this witness will benefit me in 1, 2, 3 different ways. I also have to be concerned about cross-examination.
Right.
And if they trip my witness up in cross-examination, that's very damaging for me.
Okay, we're going to have to end it there. A lot of questions. It'll be interesting testimony tomorrow, that's for sure. Paige, Tanya, Jason, thanks so much.
Thanks,
and I know
Kara.
you two will be back tomorrow, but we enjoyed having you,
Thank you
Tanya.
for
Please
having
come
me.
back.
I will.
And just